Hello everyone and welcome to lesson 14.4B. I've entitled this video, Fighting Back. This video is going to cover pages 394 to 397. African American religion. Many enslaved African Americans followed traditional African religious beliefs and practices. Others, however, accepted the Christian religion that was dominant in the United States. Christianity became, for enslaved people, a religion of hope and resistance. Enslaved people prayed for their freedom. They expressed their beliefs in spirituals, African American religious folk songs. The spiritual below, for example, refers to the biblical story of Daniel, whom God saved from being eaten by lions. Didn't my Lord deliver Daniel? Deliver Daniel, deliver Daniel? Didn't my Lord deliver Daniel? And why not every man? And you're welcome for me not actually trying to sing that. My singing voice is horrible. Spirituals helped enslaved people express joy, but also sadness about their suffering here on earth. Enslaved people also used spirituals as a way to communicate secretly among themselves, using songs like Steal Away. Sometimes they would use spirituals to convey like different locations where they might try to escape or where to go to when escaping. So spirituals are very conniving like that. Question 1. How did religion help the enslaved African Americans? Well, it gave them something to believe in. It gave them a sense of hope and a sense of resistance, and it gave them something to draw upon, like, well, look, if this could happen in the Bible and people could be saved, this can also happen to us. Question 2. What were spirituals? Spirituals are African American religious folk songs. Question 3. What were a couple of benefits of spirituals for the enslaved African Americans? Well, number 1, it gave them a chance to express joy. It gave them a chance to express their emotions like sadness, but it also was a way to secretly communicate with other enslaved African Americans about different things they wanted to communicate that they couldn't just say out loud. Slave codes. The slave codes, sometimes called black codes or Negro laws, were laws in the southern states that controlled enslaved people. Such laws had existed since colonial times. One purpose of the codes was to prevent what white Southerners dreaded most, a slave rebellion. For this reason, slave codes prohibited enslaved people from gathering in large groups. The codes also required enslaved people to have written passes before leaving the slaveholder's property. The slave codes made teaching enslaved people to read or write a crime. White Southerners feared that an educated enslaved person might start a revolt. They thought an enslaved person who could not read and write was less likely to rebel. Question 4. What were the slave codes? The slave codes were laws in the southern states that controlled enslaved people and what they could and could not do. Question number 5. What were some of the things that the slave codes did? Well, one of them was to prevent slave rebellions. So they would say you could not meet in large groups if you were enslaved people. Another one said they had to have written passes to anywhere they were going to go if they were going to leave the slaveholder's property. And another big one, huge one, was that it made it a crime to teach enslaved people to read or to write. And that was a big one as well. Here are some examples of slave codes that I found that I thought would help you understand just how crazy things were for these slave codes. In Georgia in 1848, these are some capital crimes that are punishable by death. And feel free at this point, if you want to pause the video, to read through this list. Here are some slave codes in the state of Georgia for a punishment for manslaughter. I'll let you pause the video at this time if you want to read this thoroughly. Here is a punishment for slaves for striking white people. This is just for hitting them, striking them. Feel free to pause the video at this time. Here's a punishment for circulating incendiary documents. In other words, if you are caught like handing out flyers or handing out some sort of written word that says, hey, we're going to have some sort of insurrection or we are angry at some owners or something like that, if they felt that the document was in any way causing tensions or causing anger or violence, this would be the punishment. Here's the punishment for teaching slaves or free persons of color to read. Here's the punishment for free persons of color for harboring slaves. So if you were a free African American at that time and you were caught hiding a enslaved person, then this would be the punishment for you. So as you can see with those codes, they were very tough and they were meant to strike fear into the hearts of African American slaves, but also free African Americans who had maybe thought about helping. Fighting back. Enslaved African Americans did sometimes rebel openly against their owners. One who did was Nat Turner. Turner, who had taught himself to read and write, was a popular religious leader among the enslaved people in his area. In 1831, he led a group of followers on a brief, violent rampage in Southampton County, Virginia. Turner and his followers killed at least 55 whites. 2 months after the uprising began, authorities captured and hanged Turner. Still, his rebellion terrified white Southerners. White mobs killed dozens of African Americans, many of whom had nothing to do with the rebellion. Whites also passed more severe slave codes, making life under slavery even harsher. Armed revolts such as Turner's were rare because enslaved African Americans realized they had little chance of winning. For the most part, enslaved people resisted slavery by working slowly or by pretending to be ill. Sometimes they might set fire to a plantation building or break tools. Such acts helped enslaved African Americans cope with their lack of freedom. Even if they were not free, they could strike back at the slaveholders. Question number 6. What did Nat Turner do to make the history books? He led a slave rebellion in which his followers and he killed at least 55 whites. So this is one of the most infamous of the slave revolts. Question 7. What negative impact did Nat Turner's rebellion have on the lives of the enslaved African Americans? Well, many were killed by these white mobs. And then secondly, for those that weren't killed, the whites made more severe slave codes. So the rules got even tougher for the enslaved African Americans after Nat Turner's rebellion. Question 8. Why were armed revolts rare in the South? Because enslaved African Americans realized they had little chance of winning. The deck was stacked against them. They just had so little chance of having a very successful rebellion. Yes, someone like Nat Turner could do a short-term rebellion, but in the end, there were just too many factors going against a very successful armed revolt. Question 9. What were some other non-violent ways that African Americans resisted slavery? Well, they did little things here and there, like maybe set a fire to one of the buildings or break the tools or work even slower than they could have or act like they were sick. Just little things like that gave them just a little bit of a payback on the way they were being treated. Escaping slavery. Enslaved people also resisted by running away from their owners. Often their goal was to find relatives on other plantations. Sometimes they left to escape punishment. Less often, enslaved African Americans tried to run away to freedom in the North. Getting to the North was very difficult. Among those who succeeded were Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass, 2 African American leaders. Most who succeeded escaped from the upper North. So if you look at the map up here, you had a better chance if you lived in like Missouri or Kentucky or Virginia or Maryland because the distance you had to travel was much shorter. But if you were a slave in the deep South, such as Mississippi or Alabama, Louisiana, Georgia, Florida, or Texas, your odds of making it to the North were much smaller because of the great distances you had to travel. A runaway might receive aid from the Underground Railroad, a network of safe houses owned by people opposed to slavery. Moses Grandy, who did escape, spoke about the hardships runaways faced, primary source from the narrative of the life of Moses Grandy. They hide themselves during the day in the woods and swamps. At night they travel. In these dangerous journeys they are guided by the North Star, for they only know that the land of freedom is in the north. The big danger, of course, was capture. Most runaways were caught and returned to their owners. The owners punished them severely, usually by whipping. And here you see a couple of tools that the white owners used to deter escaped African American slaves from trying to run. This slave collar would make noise and make it very hard to escape. And then this iron collar would also be a way. Imagine trying to run through trees and brush with that on you. It would be very, very challenging. Not to mention this would make you stand out and people would realize that you were on the run. So now we can answer a couple of questions. Question number 10. What were some of the reasons enslaved African Americans ran away from their owners? Well, one, they ran away from their owners as a way to maybe find relatives on other plantations. Sometimes they ran away to escape a punishment, and then sometimes they ran away to try to actually get to their freedom in the North. Question 11. Who are the two famous African Americans who successfully escaped from slavery? These would both be wonderful examples of the human spirit in this time period, and that would be Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass. Two amazing success stories. Question number 12. Which enslaved... Oh, wait, I already did that one. Question 13. No, I didn't do 12. Which enslaved African Americans had the best chance of escaping slavery? Those who lived in the upper parts of these slave states. Like I said, Missouri, Kentucky, Virginia, Maryland. You might have the best chances of escaping there because the distance is so short. Question 13. What was the Underground Railroad? That was the network of safe houses owned by people who opposed slavery, and that's places where if you were trying to escape to the north, you knew that they could offer you a safe place to hide as you were trying to make your journey up north. Question 14. What happened to most runaway slaves? Most runaway slaves sadly were caught and returned to their owners. Question 15 we have on the next slide. Southern cities. Though mostly agricultural, the South had several large cities by the mid-1800s, including Baltimore and New Orleans. The 10 largest cities in the South were either seaports or river ports. Cities located where the region's few railroads crossed paths also began to grow. These included Chattanooga, Montgomery, and Atlanta. Free African Americans formed their own communities in southern cities. They practiced trades and founded churches and institutions, yet their rights were limited. Most states did not allow them to move from state to state. Free African Americans did not share equally in economic and political life. In the early 1800s, there were no statewide public school systems in the South. People who could afford to do so sent their children to private schools. By the mid-1800s, however, education was growing. North Carolina and Kentucky set up and ran public schools. The South lagged behind other parts of the country in literacy, the ability to read and write. One reason was that the South was thinly populated. A school would have to serve a wide area, and many families were unwilling or unable to send children great distances to school. Many Southerners also believed education was a private matter. Question number 15. What did the 10 largest cities in the South all have in common at that time? They were all port cities. They were either seaports or river ports, so definitely being close to water was what they had in common. Question 16. How was the school system different in the South than in the North at that time? Well, in the early 1800s, there was no statewide public school systems in the South. It started to pick up a little bit in the mid-1800s, but still, their educational systems in general were way behind northern schools. Question 17. What does the word literacy mean? Literacy means the ability to read and write. That's why you read in literature class. Question 18. What were two reasons why literacy was lower in the South than in the North? One was because in the South, you didn't have these huge cities connected closely by roads and canals, and because people lived in cities that were so far apart in the South, it would have been hard to have a school that could service people that were spread so far apart. And then secondly, because they were states' rights people, a lot of people in the South felt like that education was more of a private matter. They didn't feel like this was something that the government should do as much as it should be done privately. And so that also led to the literacy gap as well. Well, thank you so much for watching. Once again, because of the topic, I didn't feel like I wanted to go with a meme, so instead I went with what it would look like to have Harriet Tubman on our $20 bill, which has been proposed that she replace Andrew Jackson either altogether or move Andrew Jackson to the back of the 20 and have Harriet Tubman on the front. I think it's a great idea. Obviously, that's just my opinion, but I think that looks fantastic. Well, thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.